Some HiFi products have the ability to gain a call-like following almost immediately, especially when they offer features and performance at such an affordable price. Combine that with a stylish, well-made design that's very similar, at least visually, to some of the more expensive products that we've seen from, say, Cambridge Audio, and a chassis that is no larger than a Mac Mini. It is no wonder why the WiiM AMP has already garnered so much praise. At only $299, this all-inclusive integrated streaming amp may look like a steal, but before you go and click buy now, let's make sure it's the right solution for you. The WiiM's power comes from a Texas Instruments Class D amplifier chip that produces a reported 60 watts per channel into 8 ohms and 120 watts into 4. The WiiM has a built-in ESS SAVER DAC and an analog section from one of their own streamers. It has both analog and digital audio inputs that include an optical and USB input, as well as a set of RCA-style analog inputs. What excited me most about the WiiM AMP was its ability to connect to your TV and be the centerpiece of a 2.1 home theater thanks to the inclusion of HDMI with ARC as well as CEC. And yes, the 0.1 in 2.1 means the WiiM has a dedicated subwoofer output, complete with bass management inside the app's software, which we're going to get to in just a minute. You all know the addition of HDMI is enough for me to stand up and take note, but I know a lot of you are no doubt fans of WiiM for its streaming prowess, which includes native support for nearly all streaming services like Spotify and Tidal, both wired and wirelessly. It can play back locally stored music as well, encoded in popular formats such as FLAC, and it also supports streaming protocols like AirPlay 2, Bluetooth 5.1, Chromecast. You get the idea. Setting up the WiiM AMP is pretty simple. Just make sure you have your smartphone handy. I use my iPhone 14 and download the WiiM HOME app before you get started. Getting the amp up and running on our home network was super easy. Once you connect to your network, you may need to perform a series of firmware updates. And speaking of updates, while I applaud WiiM for making constant improvements with updates to fix bugs and whatnot, there have been days when the amp could not go even 24 hours without a firmware update. Control over the WiiM is handled in 3 ways. You can physically control basic functions like play, pause, and volume on the unit itself. You can use the included Bluetooth remote, or you can make adjustments via the WiiM app on your phone. There's actually a 4th method. If you connect the amp to your HDMI-equipped smart TV, you can also control its on-off source and volume using your TV remote. Out of all of the options, I have to imagine most users are going to opt for control via the app, so let's talk about it. Sure, the app gives consumers access to a variety of popular streaming services without having to leave it, well, unless of course you're an Apple Music user like myself, but I find its level of user control more exciting. Now for this review, we use 3 different sets of speakers, including the Q Acoustic Concept 50 towers, the new KLH Kendall 2Fs, and our Cornwall 4s, which are going to make sense in just a minute. I also connected the amp to our 98-inch TCL TV via HDMI, as well as our home's Wi-Fi network, making the WiiM visible to our Google Home devices. For me, one of the most important features of this amp is PEQ, and I was really excited to test it because PEQ can help you get the most out of your speakers, and at this price, I was super impressed that it was here. But rather than use Room EQ Wizard, I first tried a third-party app called House Curve that takes a lot of the same measurements as Room EQ, but it does it all on your smartphone. And I've been playing with it for a while, and it's pretty reliable, so I didn't expect to have any problems sending a series of test signals to the WiiM through AirPlay and Bluetooth. But despite having an AirPlay connection between my phone and the amp, no audible test tones could be heard with the speakers. However, when House Curve sent that same test tone signal to our TCL TV first, which was then relayed to the WiiM through HDMI, everything worked. Unfortunately, Bluetooth and AirPlay communication it remained inconsistent and well spotty, even after several firmware updates. So just be aware of that, especially if you're an iPhone user. Obviously, if you choose to use Room EQ Wizard to generate your PEQ filters, you shouldn't have an issue because that is a hardwired solution. And as for you Android users, I had fully intended on testing the WiiM with a couple of Android phones, but during my evaluation, they sadly went missing. So if I find them, I'll be sure to update you in the comments below. Regardless of the method, applying my EQ adjustments was easy. You know I love it when products include manual PEQ, especially one as sleek as this. Apart from the inconsistent Bluetooth and AirPlay performance, everything else appeared to work as advertised. Now moving on to sound quality, the WiiM amp is very detailed from the upper mid-range through to the treble, regardless of the speaker pairing or whether EQ is applied or not. In everyday listening, this amp has a sound that is cool and lean, and this was cemented for me while listening to some of my regular test tracks like The Noose by A Perfect Circle, Tubular Bells by Mike Oldfeld, and Home by Dominic Fils-Aimé. All 3 tracks had decent intelligibility, and at moderate volumes, they even sounded impressive, especially when I focused on their more mid-rangey and treble-leaning aspects. But if I shifted my focus to the weightier aspects of the mix, even the more tenor and baritone registers in Dominique's own voice, the depth and control over the speaker's woofers just wasn't there, unless I turned up the volume, which introduced a new problem: distortion. Now, I know there are measurements out there that show the WiiM to be neutral with terrific signal-to-noise ratio, but the problem with measurements is they tend to show you a best worst-case scenario. When fed a constant test signal, I'm not surprised that the WiiM performs, maybe even over-delivers given its price. But test signals in music are not the same. Music isn't constant like a test tone, and as things become more complicated, or if you turn the volume up in order to get more weight and dynamic impact out of the WiiM, the worse the amp performs. For example, in the song The Noose, the well-recorded kick drum played back at volumes hovering around 70 dB through our corn walls hit with some moderate authority, but that concussive air and decay, as well as the sensation of the mallet striking the skin, was just largely glossed over. As a result, I had a technically deep performance, but a two-dimensional sound. The more I listened and the more I turned it up, the less organic and more sterile the sound became. Now, listening to Tubular Bells, it was the same story. The heartbeat that leads up to the crescendo lacked any surrounding air and decay, making it sound flat and frankly unnatural. However, when the bells finally let loose, the WiiM could not keep up. The highs clipped and distorted so much that I had to find the remote and hit stop, leaving me pretty confused. I wasn't listening that loud. I mean, it was spirited, but not concert level loud. So I turned the WiiM back up until the lights on the front reflected my previous volume level, and I hit play again. When the bells hit again, the max in-room volume, according to my phone's SPL meter, was 82 dB. Loud, sure, but not insane. But looking at the WiiM's amp volume control, it was at 100%. So what gives? I can tell you this, it ain't the corn walls. They have a sensitivity of 102 dB, which means that from a distance of a meter or 3-ish feet with only 1 watt of power, the corn walls should be able to reach volumes of 102 decibels. Now, as you move back from the speaker, you're obviously going to need more power to get that same volume at all distances. In our room, we sit approximately 11 feet from our speakers, but even with the added distance, the WiiM's 60 watts should have been more than enough to drive the corn walls to concert or THX volume levels. But it doesn't, at least not all of the time. And this is an issue I've noticed with other Texas Instruments-based amps. Now, let me clarify something. I am not saying the WiiM doesn't produce 60 watts per channel. It likely does. However, it seems to lack the dynamic capability to handle certain genres of music or recordings with greater dynamic range. Listening to higher quality recordings known for having large fluctuations in volume, I'm talking albums like Tubular Bells or tracks like Seville, caused the WiiM to struggle and resulted in audible distortion and clipping if I increased the volume too much. The lack of headroom also seemed to be somewhat input dependent, as heavily compressed signals such as internet radio had no issues reaching 80, 90, and even 100 dB in room, whereas sources using HDMI or the optical input were an entirely different story. Now, I can already hear some of you saying, but the WiiM isn't meant for rooms like yours. And maybe that's true, but I can tell you this much. If you do end up sitting closer to the amp, you might hear a faint whine from the chassis or your speaker's tweeters because this amplifier, it's not completely silent. If you need more oomph and you turn the volume up past a certain point, expect the tonality of the amp to skew even more towards the treble, making it just sound more two-dimensional. Completely, and I mean completely, glossing over nuance and fine detail in an attempt to sound just as dynamically punchy as possible. At high volumes, the sound is often just shouty. That said, if you can keep the WiiM's volume below 75% with in-room peaks never, and I mean never, cresting above 65 or 70 dB, the WiiM sounds fine. It may not be the best thing I've ever heard, but it is respectable, even enjoyable, considering its modest price. So how do you know if the WiiM is right for you? Well, I just want to clarify a few more things. I know there are some people who are going to disagree with me, and even a few of you who assume that I'm an elitist or have some sort of vendetta against WiiM or just cheap audio in general. And that's just simply not true, and it actually bothers me that anyone has that impression. I'm just sharing my experience and hopefully providing you with an idea of what you can expect if your listening habits are similar to mine. Although I think the WiiM amp is impressive, I don't believe that it is a one-size-fits-all giant killer, but that doesn't make it bad. just trying to set your expectations if you're going in thinking that this is going to compete with high-end brands or that it's going to sound as good as amps that cost a lot more. If you have a larger space or you really like, or maybe you need to listen at higher volumes, the WiiM may not be the best option for you, especially if you have speakers that are hard to drive. If that sounds like you, I would consider something like the Basics A2 Flex from Emotiva with one of WiiM's standalone streamers. If you're willing to spend a little bit more, the Bluesound Power Node or Audiolab 6000 AirPlay or 7000A would be a better choice. However, if you have a smaller space or you mostly listen to music in the near field, the WiiM will likely be enough for your needs. It's an excellent value that offers a lot of features at an affordable price. The WiiM could also be a great solution for those who are new to HiFi or who maybe want to switch to a simpler system. The fact that it can seamlessly integrate with your TV is just a huge bonus. I personally loved how well it integrated into our Google-powered smart home for background or whole home audio listening, but when I really wanted to listen to some of my favorite albums, I can't say the WiiM always delivered what I was after. So that's enough out of me and what I think of the WiiM AMP, but before we get out of here, yes, she's back. What did you think of it?
I think this is a really great product for a lot of people.
Yes.
Especially those who are on a tighter budget. And let's face it, there's, who isn't these days? Mm-hmm. I think it's well made. It's priced affordably, but it does have its limitations. I think you did a really good job of covering those in your part of the review. Mm-hmm. And honestly, I think if you, the viewer, can live with those, then I'm confident you're going to enjoy the WiiM. For me, the biggest downside to this amp mm-hmm. is its lack of headroom.
Yeah.
It really struggles at higher volumes, especially with certain speakers. And I know some of you probably think we're crazy because we put these on the Cornwalls, which are, I don't know what the math is, 20 times more expensive or something. Yeah. But look, those speakers are insanely efficient. And I don't give a crap about Klipsch's reported frequency response or
sensitivity ratings.
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
I don't give a those are still very efficient.
Yes.
So it is no surprise, at least for me, that this amp sounded the best with the Cornwalls, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Oh, I can see your face. What is she saying right now? That's wrong.
No, I agree. Of the three speakers, the Cornwalls did sound the best, and the WiiM did appear to have the easiest time driving them up into about, say, 50% volume. If we're looking at the graph in the app, about 50%. Once you got over that, I felt that the way that these speakers sounded kind of being pushed or being strained to drive was a little less pleasing than, say, the KLHs, although the KLHs never got as loud as the Cornwalls, and the Q Acoustics fell kind of somewhere in the middle. That's what I meant when I said, like, oh, I don't know if I would. I don't have a favorite. I don't have a best. I know we spent the most time with them on the Cornwalls just because it was the easier. It had the easiest time with them, but I wouldn't say like that's still the best pairing. I don't know what the best pairing is for this amp, to be honest.
Oh, goodness. Well, as far as the Kindles mm-hmm. go, I mean, obviously, I think those are sold at a price range that makes them a more likely pairing.
Sure. Sure.
The sound, I didn't find the sound was bad, mm-mm. but when we switched over to the Yamaha 1000A with the Kindles, you really could start to understand the WiiM's weaknesses.
Yeah.
Well, I do think that there is an aspect of this performance that you and I talked about mm-hmm. off camera that wasn't brought up in the review or wasn't really expanded upon. Okay. And that was the CEC performance and just the home theater experience, your personal thoughts on using this for a 2.1 system, because frankly you can. It has HDMI, which is something we love.
It's definitely being advertised as a solution for people that want music / a little bit of movies, and I applaud WiiM for doing that. That really is the future. it works. It works. We didn't really have any issues with that. Now you need to know that just because it has HDMI, that doesn't mean that it accepts, Dolby Atmos, DTS:X, and all that surround sound stuff. It's stereo plus a subwoofer, and the subwoofer is active as soon as you plug an RCA into the subwoofer out, and then that unlocks the bass management inside the app, blah, 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 blah. As a home theater device in small to medium-sized rooms, a bedroom system, a den, an office, stuff like that, this could be a great solution. It really, really could. I would never recommend using it out in a main room like ours, because movies typically have a lot of dynamic range as well. And I was watching Deepwater Horizon not 2-3 days ago, prior to recording this, and watching the oil rig scene. It's one of my favorite scenes. I love it. It's a real great torture test for surround sound systems. I always watch it, very familiar with it. And I actually got the amp to shut off.
Awesome. I'm so glad you went over that. Now, before we get out of here,
yeah,
I just want to talk about maybe some similarly priced alternatives.
Yeah.
Like let's say, what about like the Auralic B50 or something from Eversolo, maybe the Sonos amp?
Yeah, the Auralic B50 is going to be the most comparable. I'm not saying that because they all use similar chipsets or they all use the same DACs that you're going to get the same performance, but these are almost kits at this point. And so like the Auralic, it's another great product. I happen to like the WiiM better. I'm not saying that the WiiM sounds better than the Auralic. In fact, if you blindfolded me, I might not get it statistically right each time because they're largely the same product. Where the WiiM amp succeeds, where the Auralic pulls up short, is WiiM went to the trouble to design a complete chassis, which includes the power supply in the unit, whereas the Auralic still uses like a laptop power brick that's external. And so while it may look really small and like, ooh, that's cool, there's a lot of extra cable crap that you're now going to be like, oh, what do I do with this? So yeah, it's just sort of what do you want to deal with as far as just a slicker looking app, ease of use, just better overall industrial design. WiiM, hands down. And I don't believe it even costs that much more to get it. As for Eversolo, now Eversolo is a little bit different, but as of this recording, I don't believe that they have an entirely integrated solution. I know that they've come out with an amplifier, but they are still very much kind of a separate thing. So you get like a preamp, streamer, DAC, and then I think they now have an amplifier, or they've announced an amplifier. Maybe it's not shipping yet. So it's not really quite the same because you would still need to add an amplifier to an Eversolo system to kind of do everything that you can do at the WiiM. And the Eversolo is more expensive. But in my opinion, if you have the money, an Eversolo Z8 DAC or the new DAC streamer, whatever it's called, with the touchscreen that we also have, and an amplifier of your choosing, is going to give you demonstrably better results. And it's going to be a system that you're probably going to have for a good long while because the performance there is akin to products that cost thousands of dollars. Sonos amp, never heard it. That is the one thing that we now, Sonos amp's our new Sonos Arc. We have just about everything else now officially, and we don't have the amp. So I have no idea how it would compare. And the same would be true of the Amazon Alexa amp, if they're still making that. I think a lot of people have said the Sonos and Alexa amp are kind of interchangeable. I don't know.
Awesome.
Now it's your turn to tell us what you think, or to tell me what I got wrong. So do tell us down in the comments below. And if you like this video, please do give it a thumbs up, like, and subscribe. Go ahead and ring that bell so that you're notified when new videos come out. If you use any of the links that Kristi's left for you down below, know that that's a great way that you have all continued to show your support for this channel and the work that we do here, and we thank you very much for doing that. Follow me on Instagram at Recovering Audiophile, and that is it. That's it. I got to get out of here. This is going to be fun to edit. So anyway, the only person who has to like the sound of their system, you know the drill. It's you. It's you. So happy listening, everybody. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next video.